When I started my business, my girlfriend Audrey deliberately leaked trade secrets to my competitor, leaving me bankrupt. The next moment, Audrey became Maurice's woman, my rival's woman. Drowning in debt, I stood on a rooftop preparing to end it all when Polka, who had secretly loved me for years, found me and handed over all her family's savings. Benjamin, in my eyes, you'll always be the most outstanding person. 7 years later, my company made a comeback, and I was about to complete the acquisition of Maurice's company. But the night before the signing, my warehouse caught fire unexpectedly, reducing all the inventory to ashes. In my hospital room, I overheard a conversation between Polka and my ex-girlfriend Audrey outside the door. "You're ruthless. You dared to set fire to the warehouse. Weren't you afraid he'd burn to death inside? If he died, he died. I've always loved Maurice. If I hadn't lost that draw to you back then, I wouldn't have had to stomach that face for 7 years." I looked at my burned hands. What I thought was sharing hardship together turned out to be nothing but wishful thinking on my part. Since you all care so much about Maurice, don't blame me for what comes next. I closed my eyes, my heart seized by an invisible hand. Arson. A draw. Those 7 years of mutual devotion were nothing but her reluctant choice after losing a bet. If I hadn't married him and constantly monitored his movements, you think Maurice could have had it so smooth? I've been clearing obstacles for him. A metallic sweetness surged in my throat. I laughed silently, my burned hands wrapped in gauze, without even the strength to clench a fist. Polka hadn't noticed I was awake and continued pouring out her disgust and suffering from all these years. "This fire, don't you understand? I couldn't let him acquire son. That's Maurice's everything." After she finished speaking, there was a long silence from Audrey's side, only the sound of breathing. "All right, you should go. And remember, even though I married Benjamin, I'll never give up Maurice." After Audrey left, Polka pushed open the door, her face wearing perfectly calculated concern. "Benjamin? Are you awake? How do you feel?" I looked away, avoiding her hand reaching to check my forehead, my voice hoarse. Strange. Every time Maurice and I reach the final step, something always goes wrong. Maybe it's just fate. In business, who can say for certain? Polka's hand paused midair before withdrawing. I pulled my lips into a humorless arc, my gaze turning to the window. Maybe Maurice has too many devoted followers who can't stand to see him lose? The fire department is already investigating the warehouse fire. Polka chose her words carefully, trying to soothe my emotions. I closed my eyes, my heart ice cold. "Polka, what about you? Don't you think it's quite a coincidence?" Polka choked, her lips moving several times before finally giving up on defending herself, her brow furrowing tightly. "Benjamin, what are you trying to say? Are you suspecting me? I'm your wife." "I'm just asking casually. Why are you getting so worked up?" I looked at her calmly, watching how she instantly bristled with hostility. Polka's expression turned ugly. After a long moment, she forced out a cold snort through clenched teeth. "If you're incompetent, don't go around being paranoid." She grew more agitated as she spoke, her face contorting. That face I'd known for 7 years now looked frighteningly unfamiliar. I finally became certain. Polka had never loved me. These 7 years were a complete and utter fraud. I remained silent, but Polka was clearly dissatisfied with my silence. She stood up, walked to the bedside, and looked down at me. "Benjamin, I need you to promise me that from now on, you'll behave yourself and stop chasing unrealistic dreams. As for our marriage, some things are better left unsaid. It's not good for anyone." "I should stop dreaming? Why should I? Once I sign that contract, son will be mine. As for our marriage, Polka, do you really think there's anything left between us?" I clenched my fist, the burned skin sending searing pain through me. "I'm telling you, destroying Maurice is my entire purpose. If not this time, then next time. If not this 7 years, then the next 7 years." "You." Polka froze, then crossed her arms and let out a low, cold laugh. "Very well. I was going to keep up the act a bit longer. Benjamin, since you still want to win, you never will." My heart tightened. Her laugh sent chills down my spine. Only then did I notice that this hospital room's facilities far exceeded those of ordinary hospitals. There were even unidentified oil paintings hanging on the walls. This was an expensive private sanatorium. "What are you planning?" Before I could finish speaking, Polka knocked on the door 3 times. A man in a white coat with a sinister demeanor walked in. "Miss Polka, what are your orders?" She took a document the man handed her, glanced at it twice, her gaze falling on my gauze-wrapped hands, her tone calm. "Benjamin, a renowned entrepreneur, suffered nerve damage from the fire, resulting in permanent tremors in both hands. He can no longer perform precision work. The facility has done all it can." "Understood." My blood froze instantly. I stared at her in disbelief. This might present procedural risks. The man called Dr. Polo hesitated, but after Polka mentioned original shares in Maurice's biotech company, the doubt in his eyes vanished. I understood their transaction. A chill rose from the soles of my feet. I used all my strength to grab the glass water pitcher from the table and hurl it toward the window. The next second, Polka had already lunged at me, pinning down my arm. After 7 years together, she understood the intent behind my every move. So she also knew exactly how to cripple me from the root. Benjamin, stop struggling. You can't escape. Polka looked at me, a moment of hesitation flashing in her eyes. I roared. You lunatic. I'm your husband. I struggled violently, but my weakened post-fire body had no strength. The wounds tore open again in my struggle. Several nurses rushed in, expertly producing restraint straps. Let me go. This is a crime. My curses and struggles only resulted in tighter restraints, until cold leather straps bound my wrists and ankles. I gave up resisting, my voice hoarse. Polka. I was wrong. I surrender. I'll never appear before you again, okay? Let me go. I promise I'll disappear completely. Polka crossed her arms, watching my breakdown for a long time before shaking her head. Benjamin, I don't believe you. I know you too well. If you can persist in something for 7 years, you won't let it go now. At her signal, the man approached me with a syringe. Before consciousness was pulled away, I abandoned all questioning and pleading, staring at her intently. Polka, I've always given you everything. In my daze, the resolve on Polka's face showed a crack, but it quickly returned to cold indifference. Sorry, Benjamin. This is the last time. Before darkness swallowed me, my final thought was that I would never love her again. 7 years of marriage. When I was at my lowest, she had extended her hand to me. But that hand, from the very beginning, was meant to push me into a deeper abyss. When I woke again, the uncontrollable subtle tremor in my right hand became my only sensation. Despair, like icy seawater, instantly submerged me. Polka had actually done it. She had once been my most capable assistant, but now she destroyed my hands. Tears fell silently, yet the hatred in my heart burned hot. The aftereffects of the neurotoxin began several hours later, an aching numbness and stabbing pain that seemed to drill out from within my bones, more tormenting than the burns. I was drenched in sweat from the pain, biting my lip hard, staring blankly at the ceiling. At one point, I even considered ending it all. Well, you're awake? A familiar voice shattered the deathly silence of the hospital room. I slowly turned my head. Maurice walked in, looking me up and down before shaking his head, his face wearing fake sympathy while his eyes held nothing but a victor's arrogance. Benjamin, look at yourself now. 7 years, and you couldn't even keep one woman. Now you're just a cripple. In love, you lost to me. In business, same thing. For the rest of your life, you'll never beat me. What did you say? I spoke hoarsely. It took a while for my numb brain to process his words. The next moment, fury destroyed my reason. Get out! Get out! Don't let me see you again. You bastards! I won't let you get away with this. Get out! All of you! My hysteria clearly pleased Maurice. He even laughed out loud. See, Benjamin? Your wife would do anything for me. Though in your current state, you probably can't comprehend my happiness anymore. Get out! I used my left hand to pull out the 4 needle from the back of my hand, grabbing everything I could reach from the bedside table and hurling it at him. Water cups, fruit plates, books, one after another. But I'd overestimated my broken body. After just a few throws, I'd exhausted all my strength and collapsed on the bed, the excruciating pain in my right hand rendering me speechless. Maurice continued his taunts, but as he spoke, the fury in my heart gradually extinguished, leaving only dead numbness. Yes, I'd already lost completely. What chance did I have to turn things around? Why aren't you talking? Benjamin, say something. Weren't you always so arrogant? Didn't they call you a business genius? Why so quiet now? Maurice froze. My sudden calm denied him the sense of superiority he'd expected. Frustrated, he tried to provoke me again. Why aren't you talking, you trembling cripple? Weren't you just throwing things at me? Now you're playing dead. I weakly threw a pillow at him with my left hand, barely managing to force out, get out. That feather-light pillow landed at his feet, but Maurice acted as if he'd found the perfect excuse. He suddenly stepped back exaggeratedly, as if struck by tremendous force, looking at me in shock. Benjamin, how could you do this? I just came to check on you out of kindness. Just then, the sound of high heels came from outside. Hearing his shout, the footsteps immediately quickened. Audrey pushed open the door. Seeing the mess on the floor, she immediately glared at me viciously. Polka, who entered a step behind, also froze. Maurice, he dared to lay hands on you. Watching the two of them fuss over Maurice, I twisted my lips into a hoarse, miserable laugh. Benjamin, have you lost your mind? Get on your knees and apologize to Maurice right now. Infuriated by my laughter, Polka rushed forward, grabbed my shoulder, and dragged me from the bed, disregarding my injuries. Kneel down and apologize to Maurice right now. Audrey helped Maurice up at this point. She walked over and stepped on my still bleeding left hand, saying simply, "Kneel." I fell onto the cold floor, the pain in my hand and the nerve pain in my right hand intertwining. the agony turning my vision black. Seeing my silence, Audrey bent down, grabbed my hair, and forced me to look up at them. Can't you understand human speech? Kneel before my man right now. They humiliated me in the cruelest way possible, until I was covered in cold sweat, lying weakly on the floor, my breathing becoming faint. Only then did this farce end. I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but for a brief moment, I seemed to see reluctance and wavering in Polka's eyes. But it no longer mattered. At this point, whatever I'd done in the past, I'd received my punishment. Right now, I just wanted to leave them, to leave this hell. When I woke again, the hospital room had been cleaned up and my hands had been retreated. Sunlight through the window warmed my face, but I only felt a sense of disorientation, as if everything before had been nothing but an absurd dream. I thought this was my chance to escape, but Polka soon returned. She carried a bag containing several brand new devices. Awake? Try these. She placed a set of weighted metal utensils and a grip assist writing tool on the bedside table. Her expression had softened considerably, her tone carrying a hint of regret. Look at you. Why suffer like this just to be stubborn? As she spoke, she picked up the grip tool, trying to fit it on my hand. If you just behave, I'll take good care of you from now on. I jerked my hand back, my stomach churning. Just seeing her filled me with physical disgust. Get that away. Polka's patience seemed exhausted by my rejection. She angrily slammed the items on the table. Benjamin, I'm kindly finding rehabilitation tools for you. Can you stop being so ungrateful? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to calm down. When I spoke again, my voice was emotionless. Polka, let's make a deal. I'm willing to sign a lifetime non-compete agreement and transfer all remaining assets of my company to you or Maurice. I have only one requirement. Let me go. I was negotiating my freedom, as if it were my final business transaction. Polka seemed stunned by this, apparently not expecting me to propose such a deal. After a long moment, she shook her head. Benjamin, this isn't just to reassure him. It's because you owe Maurice. I owe him. What do I owe him? I asked in confusion. The corner of Polka's mouth curled into mockery. She said I must have forgotten such important matters. She told me that years ago, my first bucket of gold, the business model that changed my fate, was a proposal Maurice had stayed up countless nights creating. It was I who used improper means to steal it, which led to my later meteoric rise. So your current state is just things returning to their rightful owner. Stop acting innocent. You almost fooled me again. I paused slightly, then recalled those events, a trace of desolate smile appearing on my face. I finally understood where their bone-deep hatred came from. In their eyes, I'd been a thief from the very beginning. That business opportunity back then was indeed public information. I was just faster and more daring than him, but explaining now was meaningless. For a crippled man, all merit and fault lost the value of defense. Seeing I no longer argued, Polka let out a cold laugh. So Benjamin, you have no right to complain. All of this is your karma. I fell completely silent. Polka also lost interest in conversing with me and turned to leave the room. I stared blankly at her retreating figure. After a long time, I buried my face in my palms without making a sound. My life afterward became daily rehabilitation training. Different therapists came every day to guide me on using those assistive tools. To maintain her image as a devoted wife, Polka provided me with the very best of everything. I also appeared numb and compliant, just speaking less and less. Over half a month later, they finally relaxed their guard over me. I bribed a young worker from the laundry room with a stock tip guaranteed to rise. At 4 a.m, I endured the aching pain in both hands and hid in a huge linen cart, leaving that prison in the bumpy ride. Finally, at the bus stop across the street, I looked back at the lit building, my eyes calm as still water. Since you all want me to disappear, I'll grant your wish. At that moment, Maurice was at a grand celebration banquet, raising his glass high, announcing to all the guests that he'd completely defeated me. Polka stood beside him, her smile radiant. For you, I'd do anything. She gazed at Maurice's profile, her eyes full of infatuation. I know. Now we can finally be together. Maurice responded gently, about to clink glasses with her when a shrill phone ringtone broke the intimate atmosphere. Polka impatiently pulled out her phone. Seeing the caller ID, her brow immediately furrowed. The sanatorium? What could it be? Benjamin? Thinking of him, Polka still pressed the answer button. Hello. Miss Polka, this is terrible. Mr. Benjamin is gone. The chandelier in the grand ballroom of the Grand Hyatt reflected thousands of tiny, glittering fractures across the champagne flute in Polka's hand. The room was a symphony of low laughter, clinking crystal, and the soft rustle of silk. Maurice stood beside her, his tailored tuxedo fitting him like armor, his posture radiating the easy confidence of a man who had finally climbed to the top of the mountain. He was laughing at a joke made by a city councilman, his hand resting casually on the small of Audrey's back. Audrey, radiant in a crimson backless gown, leaned into him, her smile sharp and triumphant. Polka felt a quiet swell of pride in her chest. For 7 years she had played the role of the devoted, self-sacrificing wife to Benjamin. She had endured his late nights, his tireless obsession with reclaiming his lost empire, and his exhausting, desperate drive too. She had watched his face, lined with worry and burning with ambition, and felt nothing but a deep, crawling resentment. Every touch of his hand had felt like a chore. Every "I love you" had been a lie. She had to choke down to. But she had done it. She had stayed close, monitored his every strategic move, and leaked his plans to Maurice whenever the scale tipped too far in Benjamin's favor. And when Benjamin had finally been on the verge of crushing Maurice's company's son, she had taken the ultimate step. She had burned the warehouse. She had poisoned his hands. She had sacrificed Benjamin to save the only man she had ever truly loved. Her phone vibrated in her evening clutch. She pulled it out, her brow furrowing slightly when she saw the caller ID, the St. Jude Private Sanatorium. "Excuse me," she murmured to Maurice, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. Maurice didn't look at her. He merely nodded, his eyes fixed on the city councilman. Polka stepped away from the crowd, navigating the marble pillars of the foyer until the noise of the banquet faded into a distant hum. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello. Miss Polka, this is terrible. Mr. Benjamin is gone." Polka's hand tightened on the phone, the metal casing biting into her palm. Her heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer with a sudden, icy panic. "What do you mean gone? He's in a high-security private wing. He can barely hold a fork. How could he leave?" We don't know," the panicked voice of Dr. Polo's assistant stammered. Through the receiver, too. The nurse went in for his 4 o'clock physical therapy session, and the room was empty. The window is locked from the inside. We've checked the security cameras, but the laundry truck left at 3:30. We think he might have bribed someone or snuck into one of the industrial carts. Miss Polka, if he goes to the police." "Quiet," Polka hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper. She looked back toward the ballroom, ensuring no one was watching her. "He won't go to the police. He has no evidence, and his hands are ruined. He's a cripple without a penny to his name. But he cannot be allowed to wander the streets. Call the private security team. Search the bus terminals, the train stations, and his old office. Find him before sunrise." She hung up the phone, her breathing shallow and fast. She turned back to the ballroom. Maurice was still there, the center of attention, basking in the glory of a victory he believed he had won through sheer business intellect. Audrey was murmuring something in his ear, her fingers tracing the lapel of his jacket. Polka felt a sudden, cold weight drop into her stomach. Benjamin was gone. He was a broken man, a shadow of the genius he once was, but she knew him, too. She had lived with him for 7 years. She knew the terrifying, silent iron of his will. He was the kind of man who would crawl through broken glass for a mile, just to spit in the face of his executioner. And now he was out there in the dark. The rain in Chicago did not wash the city clean. It only made the grime slick and dark. Benjamin sat on a wooden bench inside the gray, neon-lit interior of a 24-hour bus terminal. The air smelled of cheap diesel, wet cardboard, and stale tobacco. He wore a heavy, grease-stained denim jacket he had stolen from a laundry rack at the sanatorium, the collar pulled up to hide his face. His right hand lay in his lap, trembling. It was a slow, rhythmic, hateful twitch. The neurotoxin Dr. Polo had injected into him had done its work well too. The nerves in his wrist felt like they were constantly being scraped by a dull blade, and the subtle, uncontrollable tremor made it impossible to even hold a pen. But his mind was clear. The fog of the sanatorium's rehabilitation drugs had finally lifted, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus too. He reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. On it was an address he had memorized years ago, the home of Thomas Vance. Thomas had been Benjamin's first business partner, a brilliant, pragmatic financial strategist whom Benjamin had ruthlessly forced out of the company. 7 years ago, when their visions clashed, Benjamin had wanted rapid, aggressive expansion. Thomas had warned him of the structural rot that such speed would cause. In his arrogance, Benjamin had used a loophole in their partnership agreement to strip Thomas of his shares and cast him aside. It was the greatest mistake of his life, not because of the money, but because Thomas had been the only person who had ever spoken the brutal, unvarnished truth to him. The bus terminal clock chimed 5 a.m. Benjamin stood up, his body aching from the cold and the bruises he had received. When Polka and Audrey had dragged him to the floor of the hospital room, too, he walked out into the damp morning air, his boots squelching on the wet pavement. He had no money, no phone, and no home. But he had a destination. He walked for 3 hours through the industrial outskirts of the city, his right hand tucked deep into his pocket to hide the constant, pathetic shaking. By the time he reached the modest brick townhouse in the quiet neighborhood of Ravenswood, his breath was coming in shallow, painful gasps. He stood on the porch and knocked on the door with his left elbow. A moment later, the lock clicked. The door opened to reveal a man in his early 40s, wearing a faded flannel shirt and wire-rimmed glasses. His hair was touched with gray at the temples, and his eyes were sharp behind his lenses. Thomas Vance looked at the battered, trembling man standing on his porch. He didn't speak for a long time. "Benjamin," Thomas said, his voice flat, devoid of surprise or anger. "You look like a man who just survived a shipwreck." "I did," Benjamin rasped, his voice dry as sand. "And the crew was led by my wife too." Thomas looked at Benjamin's right hand, which had slipped out of his pocket and was twitching against his thigh. He let out a slow, heavy sigh and stepped aside. "Come in," Thomas said. "The coffee is fresh." The kitchen of Thomas's townhouse was warm, smelling of dark roast coffee and toasted rye bread. Benjamin sat at the small wooden table, his left hand wrapped around a hot mug. His right hand lay flat on the table, vibrating against the wood in a small, pathetic rhythm. Thomas sat opposite him, silently reading the medical chart Benjamin had managed to snatch from Dr. Polo's desk during his escape, a copy of the chemical compound they had used on him too. "It's a localized neurotoxin," Thomas said, his fingers tracing the chemical formula on the paper. "Commonly used in experimental research to study nerve degeneration. In small doses, it causes permanent, localized neuropathy, tremors, loss of fine motor skills, chronic pain. They didn't want to kill you, Benjamin. They just wanted to make sure you could never sign a contract or use a computer again." "Polka knew I wouldn't stop," Benjamin said, his voice quiet, almost hollow. "She knew that as long as I could write, as long as I could work, I would find a way to destroy Maurice too." "And now?" Thomas asked, looking up. "You can't write. You can't type. The board of your company has already been bought out by Polka and Maurice's shell corporations. Your warehouse is Ash 1 too. You are legally dead to the financial world, Benjamin. What is your plan?" "I don't need to write, Thomas," Benjamin said, his eyes locking onto his former partners with a cold, terrifying intensity. "I have you." Thomas let out a dry, sharp laugh. "You think I'm going to help you? 7 years ago, you threw me out of the company we built from scratch. You took my intellectual property, you took my shares, and you left me with nothing but a non-compete agreement that ruined my career for 3 years. I was an arrogant fool," Benjamin said. He didn't look down. He didn't beg. He simply spoke the truth. "I believed that my success was entirely my own. I believed that Polka's devotion was real, and that Maurice was just a clumsy competitor who couldn't keep up. 1-2. I was wrong about everything, but I was right about one thing, Thomas." "And what was that?" "Your business strategy," Benjamin said. "You told me that Maurice's company, Sun, was built on a flawed, leveraged foundation. You told me that if we pressed them on their supply chain debt, they would collapse like a house of cards. I didn't listen then, but I am listening now." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied Benjamin. "You want to go after Sun? It's too late. With your warehouse gone and your assets seized, Maurice is preparing to merge Sun with your old company. The transaction is set to close in 3 weeks. Once the merger is complete, they will be the largest distributor in the Midwest. They'll be untouchable." "No company is untouchable when its leadership is blinded by vanity," Benjamin said, his left hand tightening around his coffee mug until the ceramic groaned. "Maurice is a narcissist. He believes he won because he is a genius too. Polka is a fanatic. She believes she saved him because of some star-crossed destiny too, and Audrey is a social climber who only loves Maurice because of his wealth too. They are a triumvirate of greed, Thomas. And greed always leaves a trail." Thomas was silent for a long time. He looked at the medical chart, then at Benjamin's trembling hand, and finally at the raw, burning intellect that still lived behind Benjamin's eyes. "I have a small, private investment fund," Thomas said slowly. "Vesper Holdings. It's low profile, registered in Delaware, mostly dealing with distressed debt acquisition. It's not enough to buy Sun, Benjamin. Not even close." "We don't need to buy them, Thomas," Benjamin whispered, a cold, elegant smile finally appearing on his lips. "We just need to buy their debt. And then we pull the plug." For the next 2 weeks, the penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan was a gilded cage of a different kind. Maurice sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, a half-empty bottle of expensive Bordeaux between him and Audrey. Polka sat opposite them, her laptop open, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. The initial celebration of Benjamin's disappearance had long since evaporated, replaced by a tense, scratching anxiety. Still nothing Maurice demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. 2 weeks. Polka. He has a permanent tremor in his hand, he's broke, and he's wandering around the city 1-2. How hard is it to find a cripple? My people are searching, Maurice. Polka snapped, her fingers clicking aggressively on her keyboard. He hasn't accessed his bank accounts, he hasn't contacted his old associates, and his passport is still in our safe. He's completely vanished. He's probably lying in a ditch somewhere. He'd better be, Audrey muttered, swirling the wine in her glass. If he goes to the media, or if the police start looking into the warehouse fire. The police won't look into anything, Maurice interrupted, his chest swelling with his usual arrogance. The fire marshal's report has already been signed off as an electrical short. I paid him off myself. And as for Benjamin, even if he speaks, who's going to believe a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic who escaped from a private sanatorium? He's right, Audrey, Polka said, though her voice lacked conviction. She looked at Maurice, expecting him to offer her a word of reassurance, a gentle touch, or the look of deep, passionate devotion she had sacrificed 7 years of her life to earn too. But Maurice didn't look at her. He was leaning toward Audrey, his hand resting on Audrey's bare shoulder, whispering something in her ear that made Audrey let out a soft, teasing laugh. Polka felt a sharp, bitter pang in her chest. During the 7 years she had lived with Benjamin, she had told herself that her sacrifice was noble. She had convinced herself that once Benjamin was out of the picture, Maurice would finally make her his queen. But now that Benjamin was gone, nothing had changed. Maurice still treated Audrey like his primary partner, his beautiful ornament for the public eye, while Polka was kept in the shadows, his administrative tool, his useful friend, who handled the dirty work too. Maurice, Polka said, her voice tight. The merger agreement with Benjamin's old company, we have a problem. Maurice frowned, looking up from Audrey. What problem? The board has already approved the asset transfer. The asset transfer is fine, but the debt restructuring is being held up, Polka explained, turning her laptop toward him. A private fund called Vesper Holdings has quietly bought up 40% of Sun's short-term supply chain bonds over the past 10 days. They've consolidated the debt, and they're refusing to roll it over into the new merged entity. Maurice let out a dismissive snort. Vesper Holdings? Never heard of them. Probably some small-time vulture fund trying to squeeze us for a higher interest rate. Offer them a 2% premium and tell them to sign. I tried, Polka said, her brow furrowing. They rejected the offer. They're demanding full repayment of the principal, $18 million, by the end of the week. If we don't pay, they have the legal right to declare Sun in technical default and halt the merger. Maurice's smile vanished. 18 million? We don't have that kind of liquidity right now. All our cash is tied up in the merger transaction and the warehouse insurance dispute. Then find the money, Maurice, Audrey said, her tone suddenly cool, her hand slipping away from his shoulder. I didn't agree to merge our companies just to watch Sun go into default before the ink is even dry. I'll find it, Maurice barked, his face flushing with a sudden dark anger. I'll call the bank. I'll leverage the original biotech shares. I'm the chairman of Sun. Nobody stops my merger. Polka watched his outburst, a cold, strange feeling beginning to creep into her chest. For the first time, she saw the cracks in the gold. Maurice wasn't a genius. Was a desperate, angry man who had built his success on the stolen ideas of others and the dark sacrifices of the women who loved him. And for the first time, she wondered if she had backed the wrong horse. The office of Vesper Holdings was located in a quiet, high-rise building in the Loop, overlooking the gray, churning waters of the Chicago River. Thomas Vance sat at the conference table, his laptop showing the real-time financial distress indicators of Sun. Beside him stood Benjamin, his face half hidden in the shadows of the room, his right hand still twitching in his pocket. Maurice just called our representative, Thomas said, a thin smile touching his lips. He's desperate, Benjamin. He's offered to pledge his personal real estate portfolio and his shares in the biotech subsidiary as collateral if we grant him a 30-day extension on the $18 million bond repayment. He's biting, Benjamin said, his voice low and raspy. He's trying to protect the merger at all costs. He thinks that once the merger is complete, the combined entity's valuation will allow him to refinance the debt and pay us off. And will it? Thomas asked. Not if the merger is based on a lie, Benjamin replied. He stepped out of the shadows, placing a thick red leather folder on the table. With his left hand. These are the original research patents for the biotech subsidiary. 7 years ago, Maurice claimed he developed the core genetic sequencing model himself. But these records prove the research was actually conducted by a team of underpaid doctoral students at the university, whose Names were systematically removed from the patent filings using forged non-disclosure agreements. Thomas's eyes widened as he flipped through the documents. This is patent fraud. If this goes public, the biotech firm's valuation drops to zero. The banks will recall their loans instantly. Exactly, Benjamin said. And the lead scientist on that original team was a young woman named Dr. Helen Ross. She's been trying to fight Maurice in court for 5 years, but Maurice used his political connections and his legal team to bankrupt her. I've already contacted her through our representatives. She is prepared to file a formal federal lawsuit for patent theft tomorrow morning. And what about the warehouse fire? Thomas asked. Do we have enough to link Polka to the arson? Benjamin's face darkened, a flash of a deep, painful memory passing over his eyes. Polka was always meticulous, Benjamin whispered. But she made one mistake. She used a private courier service to send a cash payment of $50,000 to the warehouse security supervisor the night before the fire. The courier's digital receipt was logged under a shell company she forgot to scrub from her personal device. I have the digital ledger, Thomas. It's ironclad. Thomas looked at the red folder, then at Benjamin. You're going to destroy them completely, Thomas said, his voice holding a hint of awe. You aren't just taking their company, Benjamin. You're taking their freedom. They tried to make me a ghost, Thomas, Benjamin said, pulling his right hand out of his pocket and holding it up to the light. The fingers vibrated in a constant, silent rhythm of pain. They wanted me to spend the rest of my life locked in a quiet room, watching them live on my blood too. I'm just returning the favor. The signing ceremony for the merger of Sun and Benjamin's former enterprise was set to take place in the executive boardroom on the 45th floor of the Sun headquarters. The room was pristine, with floor-to-ceiling windows showing the sweeping view of the city. A long glass table was set with silver pens, leather-bound folders, and 3 champagne buckets on ice. Maurice stood by the window, his chest puffed out, a triumphant smile on his lips. Audrey stood beside him, already holding a glass of champagne, her eyes scanning the room as if she already owned the building. Polka sat at the table, her hands resting on the keyboard of her laptop. Looked exhausted, her eyes dull, her mind constantly returning to the empty room. At the St. Jude Sanatorium. Ladies and gentlemen, the lead corporate attorney said, adjusting his glasses. As he opened the merger agreement. If we are all prepared, we can begin the signing of the transfer documents. Let's get this over with, Maurice said, stepping toward the table with an arrogant flourish. I have a celebration dinner booked in an hour. Before he could reach for the pen, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom swung open. The sound of footsteps, the slow, rhythmic thud of leather boots, echoed through the silent room. Maurice spun around, his mouth opening to demand who had interrupted his moment. But the words died in his throat. Benjamin walked into the room. He wore a simple, dark charcoal suit, his posture straight, his chin raised. His face was thin, but his eyes were sharp, cold, and burning with a terrifying, absolute authority. His left hand was tucked casually into his trouser pocket, while his right hand, wrapped in a sleek, black compression glove to hide the tremor, rested against his side. Beside him walked Thomas Vance and 3 men in dark suits carrying federal badges. Benjamin. Polka gasped, her laptop screen slipping from her fingers as she stood up, her face turning a ghostly, transparent white. You're alive? My God, Audrey whispered, backing away from the table, her champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble floor. Maurice stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, fury, and a sudden, primal panic. What is the meaning of this? This is private property. Security. Get this crazy cripple out of here. The security guards are currently being questioned by the police downstairs. Maurice, Benjamin said, his voice quiet, calm, and carrying easily through the silent room. It seems they were very interested in the courier records Polka used to pay off the warehouse supervisor the night before the fire. 1-2. Polka felt her knees go weak. She fell back into her chair, her hands trembling, as she looked at Benjamin. And as for the merger, Thomas Vance stepped forward, pulling a document from his briefcase. Vesper Holdings has officially declared Sun in technical default on its short-term debt of $18 million. We have filed a motion in federal court to freeze all of Sun's assets, including the biotech subsidiary, pending the outcome of the patent fraud lawsuit filed by Dr. Helen Ross this morning. Patent fraud? Maurice screamed, his face turning a dark, furious purple. That's a lie. I developed that sequencing model myself. The federal court doesn't think so, Maurice, Thomas said, handing a copy of the lawsuit to the lead corporate attorney, whose eyes went wide as he read the first page. The court has already issued a temporary injunction halting the merger. All transactions are frozen. Maurice let out a sharp, choked gasp. He turned to Polka, his voice rising to a frantic shriek. Polka, do something. Use the funds. Call the bank. There are no funds, Maurice. Polka whispered, her voice dead, her eyes fixed on the black compression glove on Benjamin's right hand. The bank has already frozen our accounts. It's over. Audrey looked at Maurice, then at the federal agent standing by the door, and, finally at the empty, broken promise of the Sun Empire. She slowly reached for her designer clutch, stepped away from Maurice and began to walk toward the exit. Audrey, Maurice gasped, grabbing her arm. Where are you going? We're a team. We're going to fight this. Get your hands off me, Maurice, Audrey said, her voice cold and sharp as glass. She shoved his hand away, her eyes filled with a deep, absolute disgust. I married a successful entrepreneur, not a fraudulent thief who's about to go to prison for 20 years. Don't ever call me again. She marched out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, not once looking back at the man she had claimed to love too. Maurice stood alone by the shattered remains of his champagne glass. Two of the federal agents stepped forward, producing a pair of heavy metal handcuffs. Maurice Baxter, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, patent theft, and conspiracy to commit arson. Please put your hands behind your back. As the metal clicked around Maurice's wrists, he looked at Benjamin, his face twisted in a desperate, weeping fury. Benjamin, please. It was her. Polka was the one who set the fire. She's the one who poisoned you. I didn't know anything about it. I swear. I know, Maurice, Benjamin said softly, his voice entirely devoid of pity. But you accepted the prize. And now you pay the price. The agents led Maurice out of the room, his frantic, weeping pleas fading down the corridor. The room was silent again, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft, ragged breathing of Polka, who was still sitting in her chair, her head bowed. I walked over to her, my boots making no sound on the thick rug. I stood opposite her, looking down at the woman who had spent 7 years pretending to love me just to destroy me too. Polka, I said quietly. She slowly looked up, her eyes filled with tears, her face a ruin of grief, regret, and a sudden, terrible understanding of what she had thrown away. Benjamin, she whispered, her voice cracking as she reached out a hand, her fingers trembling as if she wanted to touch my sleeve. I was wrong. I was blinded by Maurice. I thought he was my destiny. But you always gave me everything too. I looked at her trembling hand, then slowly pulled my right hand out of my pocket. I pulled off the black compression glove, revealing the pale, scarred skin of my hand. The fingers vibrated in that constant rhythmic tremor, a permanent, physical record of her devotion, too. I did give you everything, Polka, I said, my voice steady, cold, and final. My company, my trust, and 7 years of my life. And you gave me this. I dropped the black glove onto her laptop keyboard. The police are waiting downstairs, I said, turning my back to her. The charge is attempted murder and arson. I've already provided Dr. Polo's signed confession. He was very cooperative once the medical board revoked his license. To Benjamin. No, please, Polka sobbed, throwing herself onto the floor, her hands reaching for the hem of my trousers. Don't leave me. I love you. I've always loved you. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out of the boardroom, my steps firm and steady, leaving her cries to fade into the empty, sterile air of the high-rise. Outside on the street level, the rain had finally stopped, and a sliver of bright, clean sunlight was beginning to break through the gray clouds of the city. Thomas Vance was waiting for me by his car, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the morning light. He looked at my face, then at my right hand, which I had tucked back into my pocket. What now, Benjamin? Thomas asked softly. Now, I said, looking up at the bright, clean sky. We built something real. I got into the car, the door closing with a soft, final click, and we drove away from the tower, leaving the ruins of the 7-year illusion far behind in the shadows.